right here today. Grace is defined in the Webster's Dictionary as unmerited help given to people by God. But grace is not limited to just the Bible. It certainly plays a role in a teenager's life every day. Let's say, this happened a lot to me this year, you don't study for a test whatsoever, and somehow you happen to pass it. Or when you happen to ask a girl to prom, and in a million years you never think she would say yes, but she actually does. So that's grace right there. Or, this is a personal one. When Auburn and Alabama were playing in the Iron Bowl, and at the very end of the game, with 0 seconds left, Auburn ran the entire length of the field and won the game. But in all seriousness, grace and forgiveness play a huge role on this Easter Sunday. And I'm going to give you 3 examples of how that happens. So, I have this book here that was given to me me and my sister, a long time ago. And this is called the Alice in Bible Land story series. I don't know if anybody's heard of that. It was kind of like a last-ditch effort for my parents to make me read. But that didn't work because I have an older sister. What are they there for? They read to you. So, thanks, Anna. But one of the story that I'm going to focus on for this part is the story of Zacchaeus. And so, in this story, a little girl named Alice, it's kind of a play on Alice in Wonderland, sort of. She goes through a portal and she experiences all these amazing Bible stories firsthand. And so this one in particular is about Zacchaeus. And so, as we all know, and as we heard just a little bit ago, Zacchaeus was a tax collector who was also a very, very wealthy man. But also, in Bible times, many of these tax collectors were very corrupt and not great men. Alice describes him like this. He was a very, very rich man and wore the finest things, handsome robes with golden threads and jewelry and rings. He went around collecting tax from people all in the town, but when he did, they greet him with a most unfriendly frown. Now, Jesus at this time was traveling through Jericho, which was where Zacchaeus lived. And Zacchaeus had heard all these amazing and appalling stories about this man named Jesus, so he was a little curious to go see. But as the rhyme that we all learned in Bible school, Zacchaeus was a wee little man, so he had to climb up the sycamore tree to see Jesus. But Jesus saw him first, and he said, "Get out of the sycamore tree and let me dine with you." And as Jesus talks to Zacchaeus about the sins he'd committed, right then and there, Zacchaeus repents and asks for forgiveness. And of course, being the graceful man Jesus is, grants it to him. This is an amazing illustration of how all you need to do is acknowledge your sins and ask for forgiveness. Because of God's grace, it will always be forgiven to you. Always be given to you. The next example kind of hits close to home for me, at least. So, for you who don't know, my name is Peter McGill. And see, it's kind of a special name to me because almost every single Sunday, somehow I hear my name spoken. And not everyone may have a cathedral named after them or even declared a saint. But from a young age, I figured out there's a lot of Peters that set some pretty high standards. Like, let's say, Peter the Great, you've noticed that I've been in history classes here. Peter the Great, he brought the entire country of Russia out of the Great Depression. And then, there's Peter Pan. He's a pretty cool guy. He can fly for crying out loud. But the one who really sets the bar for all Peters is a fisherman named Simon. Now, during the Easter story, we usually don't talk about Peter in a good way almost, because usually the story you hear of him is how he denied Jesus 3 times. But this wasn't the entire story. See, once Jesus rose from the dead, he met with his disciples again and again. And this is where you hear this verse that Jake just said about how Jesus asked him 3 times if he loved him, and every single time stronger than the last. He said, "Yes, Lord, you know I love you." But see, the thing is, when Jesus was at his weakest, Peter strayed from him, but Jesus never strayed from Peter. And this is another great example of how you just ask for forgiveness and Jesus never gives up on you. And now, the last example that I have is, in my opinion, the most significant. As you just heard, when Jesus was up on the cross, he yelled out to the Lord, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they do." And the amazing thing about this is none of them deserved his forgiveness at all. They betrayed him, tortured him, crucified, and killed him. And there is not a crime worse than that. But he did forgive them, which is the amazing part. This is a quote from C.S. Lewis, who wrote, "To be Christian means to forgive the inexcusable, because God has forgiven the inexcusable in you." Now, while researching for the sermon, for days and days, I spent looking for a story about forgiveness and a miraculous story about that. And though all of them were really great, none of them pale in comparison. All of them pale in comparison to the story I'm talking about right now of Jesus forgiving the entire world. But those were only 3 examples of how Jesus forgives all of humanity and people who don't deserve it. And that's why he's so graceful. The entire New Testament is just a huge story of God's grace and forgiveness for all of humanity. And I'm going to end with another quote from Alice in Bible Land, and this is from the Easter story. On Easter morning, Jesus rose. He was no longer dead. And everything that happened in just the way he said. His church was born on Easter when he told his friends to share the good news of his teachings with people everywhere. Thank you. I'm sorry. You should come on up to the cross as the music starts to put a flower in for a family member, and also there are 2 plates on the side. And they sponsor our Appalachian Service Project this summer. And so, as you hear every Sunday, please give gracious.